Hi everyone, it's William back with this week's installment, 2 days late, of Life on the Magic Mountain, our exploration of the famous Thomas Mann novel, which was published 100 years ago, and it's 1st December now. So I should have mentioned this earlier, that the publication date was actually in November. So some interesting things are or were going on and coming out in relation to that. So one of them is the latest issue, the December 2024 issue of the Atlantic magazine, an excellent magazine, I think, has this fantastic article called "The Magic Mountain Saved My Life. When I was young and adrift, Thomas Mann's novel gave me a sense of purpose. Today, its vision is startlingly relevant." I'll show you this quickly. I don't want to fall afoul of any copyright laws. It's actually quite a short article, and I was skeptical at first when I heard that it really sounds like hyperbole, that the Magic Mountain saved my life, but it turns out that it was literally true in the case of this very young man. He was about Hans Castorp's age, and he was alone for the first time in his life as a Peace Corps volunteer in Africa, and it brought up all kinds of psychological fault lines that he hadn't realized he had. Again, rather like Hans Castorp, and he became actually suicidal. But he had brought the Magic Mountain with him along with other books, and he found it so intriguing and so engaging and good that on a couple of nights, he says, when he was really feeling suicidal, the desire to finish reading the novel actually got him over the hump, so to speak. So he's a staff writer for The Atlantic, and his name is George Packer. And I may have been too convinced that I knew it all when it came to the Magic Mountain, because I've read it so many times. And because I have my historical research in Davos, and as the historian in residence at the old sanatorium Schatzalp, which is now a hotel, for several months a year, but he offered me a different perspective and a broader context, because he is talking about in this article the transformation that Thomas Mann himself went through, that he started off being very much a German nationalist and jingoist and conservative before the First World War, and was thought that Imperial Germany should pursue this war and should win it, and that the Western democracies he was ready to sneer at, and so much so that it alienated him with his brother Heinrich, also a writer and a very good one. Some people, in fact, prefer Heinrich, although I personally do not. But anyway, Heinrich was a liberal. And the two brothers, if I recall correctly, didn't speak to each other for 7 years. And with respect to the First World War, Heinrich was saying how disastrous this was. And Castorp, and before the war, Thomas Mann had already started writing The Magic Mountain, and it would have been quite a different book, because the war really transformed him, and gradually he came around to seeing democracy as an excellent thing, until finally, as we all know, during the Second World War, he was very important as a proponent of democracy and a person giving a warning about National Socialism, and during the war, from the United States, making broadcasts that people could listen to in Germany if they dared to. In fact, I met a woman at Schatzalp in the 90s who had been a teenager and had done exactly that. She had listened to Thomas Mann's broadcasts that she was able to pick up. And after the war, as you know, a woman, no longer a teenage girl, but a woman, she decided to pursue literature, and she became a literature professor. So Thomas Mann definitely had a profound effect on her as well. And I wonder, I never actually asked her if Schatzalp or if the Magic Mountain was the reason why she became a regular at Schatzalp. I'm not sure about that. All right, so today's chapter is called Growing Anxiety / Two Grandfathers and a Twilight Boat Ride. So a lot, that's saying a lot in that chapter name. Anxiety and a twilight boat ride with two grandfathers who are now both deceased. So almost something like what Jung called the night sea journey, where you go out at night on some body of water in a sort of dream or an active imagination, and you sort of explore the existential depths. And we know that that's what Hans Castorp is destined to do and is starting to do. So I'm indoors, as you can see, but I thought I would wear my Schatzalp cap today in honor of the fact that this chapter is one of the chapters in the Magic Mountain that actually references Schatzalp by name. And Schatzalp is the only sanatorium that is mentioned by name in the novel. But Schatzalp, of course, is not just the name of the sanatorium. It's the name of that part of that mountain plateau. And I think, what is it? I think it's about 500 meters above Davos and much higher up than the Wald Sanatorium where the Mann stayed and the Berghof where Castorp and Joachim stayed. So it's also, even back then during the sanatorium era, it was also a destination for tourists because you would take the funicular, the cable car up, and you had a sled run and a world-class bobsled run. You had a restaurant with a magnificent panoramic view, and it was a very popular place to go, kind of a must-see in Davos, even though you would not actually set foot in the sanatorium itself. I hope my dogs are going to behave here. So we begin the chapter by Thomas Mann through Hans Castorp referring to ugly, thick fog and thunderstorms. Hans Castorp is noting that the weather has not been good during his stay. It snowed, and now we have fog and thunderstorms. Well, I have to say, I have a bone to pick with Thomas Mann in that respect, because for me, the thick fog that you have sometimes is anything but ugly. It's really the atmosphere that it creates for anyone who does want to probe the existential depths, or even just do that, for a couple hours, sitting out on your balcony with that cloud swallowing up the mountainside. It's gorgeous. It's one of my favorite things. The thunderstorms up there on a mountainside are also gorgeous. So I don't know what he's talking about using that particular adjective of ugly. But at any rate, Joachim tells Hans, "What a shame," he says. "I had thought we would have breakfast up on Schatzalp or wherever at least once." Wherever? What are you talking about, Joachim? I thought we would have breakfast up on Schatzalp or wherever. I mean, come on, it's Schatzalp that you want to have breakfast at. So again, I have a bone to pick here with Thomas Mann. Castorp is fine with that. He's not disappointed. And the author writes, whatever hopes he might have were just as easily fulfilled or disappointed here as on some Schatzalp or other. Okay, again, Schatzalp or wherever, some Schatzalp or other. What's wrong with Thomas Mann? Did he, for some reason, not like Schatzalp? I don't know. He surely would have gone up there. Absolutely. But yeah, it is what it is, I guess. Okay. But, let me say, if you have not been to Davos and you just love the Magic Mountain, so you're thinking, I want to go to Davos, go to Schatzalp. Don't listen to Joachim. Don't listen to Hans. Don't listen to Thomas Mann, because that is where you're going to get the true Magic Mountain experience. It is the the place that preserves the atmosphere, the place where you can go and sit out in a Liegestühle on your balcony and enjoy the thick fog, which is anything but ugly. Or if you're lucky enough to have a thunderstorm while you're there. Okay, I can see my dogs are going to be problematic. All right, so at this point, Hans Castorp starts to feel like things are moving too quickly as far as in reference to the end of his stay. He began to fear that the end of his stay was winging its way toward him. Okay, the days had begun to fly by. And you would think if on the one side he's really freaked out by what he's encountered at Schatzalp, it's such a different world and he can't quite wrap his head around it, and you would think he would actually be anxious to leave, but no, he began to fear that the end of his stay was imminent. And so why is that? Well, more than anything else, because of Frau Chauchat. He wants to stay and explore that relationship, which, such as it is, he hasn't even spoken to her yet. So this is such a long chapter. So my Kindle edition, instead of giving you page numbers, gives you an amount of time, how much time is left if you sit down and read the chapter straight through. And at the beginning, it tells me that this chapter takes 45 minutes to read straight through. I would say if you are a methodical reader and an immersive reader, it would take longer than 45 minutes. But at any rate, so even reading it would take more, just reading it with no commentary would take 45 minutes or longer. So we have to do it in small pieces, and indeed, it's more or less a divided chapter. So in this chapter, you have this whole thing about the night sea journey and the two grandfathers, but you also have, in the first part of the chapter, you have a lot about Frau Chauchat and Hans Castorp's relationship to her. There's already this, what Mann refers to as a silent relationship. So we'll get to that. So after dinner, we're told everybody goes into the salon. There's a big salon, and then there are smaller salons, a ladies' salon, a reading room, sort of salon to go and play chess or backgammon or what have you. And then there's the big salon. And so after the last meal of the day, they have 5 meals at the Berghof. After the last meal of the day, they go and have this time of socializing, which Hans Castorp notes seems to last anything from 20 minutes to an hour, I guess, depending on what the mood of the day is and how much people need to go and do the rest cure, and it's not very much time. So he's thinking of this in the context of what Joachim has said about how it's hard to get to know anyone except the people sitting at your own table. So these are group tables. Each table has room for 10 people. And there are 7 of the tables in the dining room, and you get to know, you have 5 meals a day in the company of your table mates, so you get to know them, but it's hard to get to know other people because this period of socialization is so short. I mean, it is a hospital after all. It's like a hybrid of a grand hotel and a hospital, and even in a hotel that doesn't have any hospital function, you're not usually going to get to know people, so unless you share a table with them. And indeed, as soon as they depart the dining room and go into the grand salon, they break into smaller groups. And so Hans Castorp's obstacle is that he cannot make Frau Chauchat's acquaintance during this period of socialization, because she goes immediately into what Mon calls the little salon with the other members of her, with her other table mates, and this is called the good Russian table, where all of them sit. And here again we have a certain amount of prejudice. There's the good Russian table and the bad Russian table. And the good Russian table, the people there are still suspect in the eyes of people like the very proper Hans Castorp, but at least they dress correctly and they have, acceptable table manners, whereas the people sitting at the bad Russian table are the kind of people that the men don't wear cuffs. Back in the day when you attached cuffs to your shirt and a collar, they don't do that, and they don't have good posture. And, two of them who are Hans Castorp's neighbors have noisy sex every morning that disturbs him. So that's the bad Russian table. The good Russian table is where Frau Chauchat sits, although there are very things about her that are very suspect as well, as we'll see. So I'll pause for just a minute to talk about what things were like at Sanatorium Schatzalp and what things are like at Hotel Schatzalp now in terms of entertainment and socializing. So one thing that's very different if you compare Schatzalp and Wald Sanatorium or the Berghof Sanatorium, is that you are not going to walk down typically. It's not that it's hard. It will take you between 20 and 30 minutes to walk down to Davos, to town, from Schatzalp. But God knows, if you're a person at a sanatorium and you're not like Hans Castorp, who's perfectly healthy, that's a strenuous walk. And if you're down too late, then you might have to walk back up, because the cable car only goes to a certain time. So if you're in Davos now during the season, the winter season, it's going to go late. You don't have to worry about it. You're going to be able to, I think the last one is 1 a.m. or something like that. But if you're there in the off season, as I often am, when I'm in residence and the hotel is closed, then on the weekends I need to walk not only down but up. And so for modern guests, as I said, if you're there during the high season, it's not an issue. But on the other hand, here you are up on a mountainside, you're relaxing. Do you really want to bother to put your coat on and go to the funicular, get on the funicular, go down to town? Well, sure, why not? But on the other hand, if you just want to spend a relaxing evening, what can you do at Schatzalp? Well, there's music. The Grand Salon is very nice. There's the little salon, you could call it, which is the game room. It's not called the game room, but it has pictures of chess pieces and I think dominoes on the original decor for that little room. And yeah, in the past there used to be a little combo that played, and some people would dance. And now you can dance to the piano music. There's a piano player usually. And yeah, you can sit at the bar. There's an area where you can smoke cigars. There is a TV. The X-ray bar has a big screen TV if you want to watch a football match or something. Then you can also go to the so-called TV room, although it also has a TV, but I like it because it tends to be actually a very quiet place. where you can just go and read if you don't want anything to disturb you at all. Because typically when people are watching things like the football matches, they're watching them in the X-ray bar, which is a large room. It's the old X-ray room where X-rays were literally taken. So yeah, you have the option of going down to town and doing whatever fun things are going on in town, or having a relaxing evening in the hotel itself, in the same way that people would have when it was a sanatorium and when they didn't really have the option in the evening. It would have very much been looked askance upon for them to go down to town in the evening. So you can have that authentic experience if you wish to. And it's certainly one of the few hotels in Davos, I would say, where you can indeed have that authentic experience. Okay, should I go on? Well, I guess I will. So now is when things really turn to the idea of what relationship, if any, can Hans Castorp have beyond this just talking about Frau Chauchat with his table mate, Fräulein Engelhardt, or sort of exchanging the occasional glance with her. Can he have a relationship beyond that? And it's not at all clear at this point. So I'll quote the book here. The narrator: "We accused Hans Castorp before of being uninhibited, but whatever the aim of his desires, a social acquaintance with Frau Chauchat was not what he had in mind, and he was in fundamental agreement with those circumstances that worked against it. So he does not desire a social acquaintance with her." Okay, and then her allure, we are told, was insufficient to make a grandson of Hans Lorenz Castorp abandon his firmly held convictions. So what were his convictions? Now, worth noting, Hans Lorenz Castorp was this grandfather who raised him for 1 or 2 years after his parents had died, and he was an orphan. And Hans Castorp was, I think, between 6 and 8 years old when he went to live with his grandfather. And his grandfather was not an unkind man at all, but he was very rigid. He was very elderly, and he was very rigid. And there was a big painting of him in the house showing him all in black with a Spanish ruff. And that was the image of him that Hans Castorp continued to have and revere. So a person who knew his place in the world, knew other people's places in the world, and like the Thomas Mann of before the war, did not believe that people should diverge from those places, and very much it's a class thing. Not just a national thing. There are Germans and there are non-Germans, but very much a class thing. Okay, so he is not going to abandon those convictions on behalf of Frau Chauchat, or so he is telling himself and thinking of his grandfather, who would be horrified by the very idea. So the narrator goes on: "He could not possibly have anything to do with a strange woman who lived her life at various resorts, separated from her husband and yet never wearing a wedding ring, who had bad posture, slammed doors behind her, rolled her bread into little pills, and doubtless chewed her fingernails." I shudder to think what Hans Castorp would think of me if he ever came across me in the dining room at Schatzalp. But at any rate, these things just make her anathema to someone like Hans Lorenz Castorp, whom he has gotten his convictions from. So but the narrator tells us it wasn't a matter of personal arrogance, but an arrogance of a more general and traditional sort. I'm quoting: "It was the source of the sense of superiority that he could not and would not throw off when considering Frau Chauchat's character and person." And the only thing that he can imagine with this silent relationship and where it might go was, in quotes, a vacation adventure. Because Frau Chauchat was sick listless, feverish, and worm-eaten deep inside, a condition that was closely bound up with the dubious nature of her whole being. So it's not just that she has tuberculosis or supposedly has tuberculosis. These adjectives, these descriptions of being feverish, worm-eaten, listless, these are really not physical symptoms so much as moral characteristics in in Hans Castorp's mind. She is in fact corrupt, and if he comes too close to her, he is in danger of being corrupted. And a lot of what we're saying here, I think, also is tied in with the idea of promiscuity, that she is a married woman, she doesn't wear her wedding ring, we don't see her having sex with anyone or flirting, and yet or Hans Castorp looks at her and sees, to some extent, a fallen woman. And it's also tied in, as we talked about last time, with ideas of freedom. And freedom is something very alluring, not living your life for anything but that makes you rigid or makes you adhere to very sort of circumscribed limitations, but to have the freedom of the East. So this is what Russia represents to him in Central Asia. Freedom, but corruption. Okay, so, but something very alluring, and Eros comes into it as well, because this boy that he'd had a crush in school was also Slavic. Okay, so with respect to snobbery, this makes me think of the writing, of Ford Madox Ford, a British author who's an absolutely brilliant writer, writing a little later than the Magic Mountain, maybe not, around the same time period as Thomas Mann. And the reason why his characters are so unlikable to a modern reader, and especially to an American, is that they're absolute snobs, and we're supposed to view their snobbery as something sympathetic about them, as something admirable about them. And like Hans Castorp, they're always judging people on the basis of small things. Does she chew her fingernails? Does he have bad posture? What does he order at the dinner table? There's even my favorite Ford Madox Ford book called The Good Soldier. There's even a line where the narrator, the main character, tells the reader that he can spot his own kind of people. He calls them good people. He can spot good people by what they order in the dining room at the hotel where he's staying, by their clothes, by how they walk, by little teeny things, little mannerisms, little etiquette, that sort of thing. And that's supposed to be something that we admire in him. It is pure snobbery. And Hans Castorp absolutely has that. Okay, and this also makes me think about Dmitri, Grand Duke Dmitri, and his time at Sanatorium Schatzalp, where he died, and he was past this age of being a young man in his 20s, thinking about what road do I take in life, and on what basis do I choose that road. But he's very similar to Hans Castorp in some ways not, but in some ways very similar. All of this took part for him before he was at the sanatorium at the end of his life. And in the part of his diaries that I'm reading right now, when he was 29 years old and approaching his 30th birthday with some degree of horror, he had three kinds of relationships that he was thinking about. One is passion, eros, throwing yourself just into wild sex with, various women from the demi-monde. He'd done that. And the other one was a life of fulfillment, fulfilling yourself in having good, supportive spouse who you love, who makes your life comfortable and you make her life comfortable and happy and calm and peaceful, and you have children. And after having been a wild boy, much more so than Hans Castorp ever was, he met a woman in Copenhagen who was sweet and good wife material in his assessment. And it wasn't just on a superficial level that he was thinking this. It was more like, I could be happy. This could be what would make me happy in life. And so maybe she would be the equivalent. Her name was Marie Louise, and maybe Marie Louise would be the equivalent of what Thomas Mann keeps annoying me by referring to in the novel as a silly little goose in the flatlands. So Hans Castorp's choice is either to allow himself to be corrupted and follow this passionate but also soulful relationship with Frau Chauchat, or to settle for a silly little goose in the flatland. And he's kind of a silly goose himself, but they would make a nice life for each other in their little nest with their children. So those are the two options. In Dimitri's case, unfortunately, that second option wasn't as uncomplicated as it was for Hans Castorp. Because he was royal, he felt that he had a duty, and he actually owed it to fate to seek a royal match, even if he wasn't in love with the person in question. And that was not personally what he wanted, but he was struggling with this idea of passion versus contentment versus duty and fate. So Hans Castorp, he's pretty much in the same page, except, he's at the sanatorium when he is 24, and Dimitri is at the sanatorium when he's in his late 40s and dies when he is 50. And Dimitri had opted for the non-royal wife, not Marie Louise, another woman, an American woman named Audrey, and unfortunately that had ended in divorce. She'd fallen in love with another man, and he was very hurt by that, devastated by that. And so when he was at Schatzalp, where did he stand on the relationship part of the spectrum? Well, he had a relationship there. He had a relationship with an Italian woman named Rosalia Termini, and there are several pictures of him with a woman whom I assume to be her, because there's obviously, given the number of pictures and the attitude that they are in towards each other, they're a couple. So, but what I can't say is whether the woman, the unidentified woman in these pictures, was Fräulein Termini or not, because Fräulein Termini is the one that he talks about in his diaries, but in the pictures, the woman is unidentified, so I can't quite make a definite connection between the two of them. But at any rate, she was young, she was non-royal, she looks very sweet in these photographs, and I think maybe at this point in his life, he was saying, yes, this is what I want. So in the past, he'd had Coco Chanel, he'd had the wild fling with Coco Chanel, and then he'd had his wife, and that didn't work out. And now, the end of his life, he's dying. He has this woman who hopefully gave him the kind of comfort that he'd always wanted, and he himself to her. Okay, but funnily enough, so Hans Castorp is starting to stalk, let's say, in a benign way, but he's starting to stalk Frau Chauchat. And he knows that she's late for meals, so he comes late too, so that they'll meet in the doorway. And he engineers encounters in the long corridors. He knows basically her routine. And Dimitri was doing the same thing when he was in his mid-20s, and he was staying in a hotel, living in a hotel right after the revolution in London, at the London Ritz, and he saw this young woman, and he just was smitten by her, just absolutely infatuated with her. So he started doing this same sort of thing. He started, he knew when basically her routine, and he would go so that he would reach the lift at the same time that she did, and they would get on the lift together. And the funny thing is that they act. He was inspired by passion, but they actually ended up being such good friends that they were still writing to each other when he was at Schatzalp. Her name was Giselle Marburg. Okay, so my phone is about to die, and I've been going too long, so I will just leave this with a question of will Hans Castorp's idea of a relationship with Frau Chauchat change? Will he go from looking for a one-night stand to something deeper? So that's something that we'll see as the novel unfolds. And I wonder, we're basically shown that Hans Castorp, probably 95% chance that he dies in the First World War. We see him as a soldier running across a field, and a shell explodes right where he's at, and he probably would have been blown to bits, but Mann doesn't actually tell us that he was. So the question would be, would Frau Chauchat have been like Giselle Marburg was for Dmitri, and would they have been keeping in touch with each other when they were people in their 50s and late 40s? I would love to know the answer to that. Thank you for being patient with this long this long session, and I hope to see you next week to continue our explorations of the chapter Growing Anxiety / Two Grandfathers and a Twilight Boat Ride. Bye.